we're honoured to have Steve Cadigan join us. And Steve's recently published a book called Workquake, which is a pretty good read as well. And he relies on insights from his illustrious career as an HR executive at LinkedIn, Electronic Arts and Cisco, where he helps us navigate the workforce and where it's heading and what that means for executives and HR leaders around the world. So how do you ensure that you sort of manage the world as it's changing and ensure that you're still sort of capturing the talent that's there to run your business and become successful in your business? We're also really glad that we're joined by Saad Siddiqui. Saad's general partner at Telstra Ventures, a great colleague of mine, and he has a massive passion in finding human-centric innovation to support the field workforce. So the human side of investment is really, really key to my heart as well. So I'm really, really excited to introduce Saad and Steve. So Saad, over to you to chat about the evolution of what we're going to call a fluid workforce.
Thank you so much, Gup. And Steve, really appreciate you joining us today. One of the things that I'm actually really passionate about is how the workforce is changing. And I'm really excited about the conversation that both Steve, you and I have had multiple conversations on. And what I'd love to do to kind of start things off is like kind of share some of my observations and lay out the landscape in terms of how we're sort of looking at it. And we'd love to kind of get your diagnosis of where we are. And then hopefully as time goes on, get into some of the solutions that enterprises can act on as the workforce constantly is changing. So as I sort of think about the way the world has changed, especially in COVID, enterprises are in a crisis. They are in a crisis because their business models are under a lot of stress because of newer technologies. They're under a lot of stress because the workforce, if you look at millennials are generally staying within companies for less than 2 years or 3 years. And in addition to that, there's a lot of cost pressures, right? So there is cost pressures that are forcing enterprises to reduce benefits and also having some layoffs as well in some of the traditional economies, traditional industries. And if I kind of look at, so that's one side of the equation. And then on the other side, if you kind of think about from the employee's perspective, it's taking my personal story. I graduated from college in 2008, which was a really interesting time to graduate because I initially had a job offer at Bear Stearns, which by the time I actually graduated wasn't a bank anymore. And then after that, got a job at Merrill Lynch, where we were actually acquired by Bank of America about a month into my job. And working in the financial industry, I started seeing people that had 30 plus years of experience being laid off and unceremoniously taken out of the office, where they couldn't say goodbye to folks that they've worked with over 30 years and considered part of their families and stuff. And what that sort of made me start thinking about is my career is sort of in my hands, and I have to take ownership in terms of how I think about learning and developing as a professional. And if you kind of take a massive step back, we saw this degradation of benefits over time, where if you joined a company like General Motors and Ford, you had all these benefits. You got in, if you did a good job, you would progress through the ranks, and you'd be set up with for life with pensions and things of that nature. But that's sort of all kind of slowly going away, which sort of forces employees to start taking a bit more ownership of their careers. So those are some like high level observations that I've been sort of looking at, and would love to get your thoughts on like, what's your prognosis or diagnosis of some of these challenges here?
Well, I think, Saad, if I could expand on your story, and I think it's these sessions are more interesting when we hear real personal testimonials, is think about all the children of all the people that were let go, all those 40, 50, 60-year-olds. Think about the impression that made on the kids whose parents gave a lot of their time away from their children to the company, just let go, and here's a box, no goodbye parties, no thank you, and no recognition. And that's not been lost on your generation. And you had a front row seat to a industry that didn't realize that what the bank was really this. the bank was becoming the mobile device. And what do banks know about mobile devices? And beware the industry that Google wants and Amazon wants and Apple wants, right? Like, you don't want to be in an industry that they're coming after you, because if it's a technical advantage, they probably have a bit of an edge. But I think what you're speaking to in a macro fashion is just all these dimensions before the pandemic, by the way, that really have been eroding, or shall we say, eroding confidence in what a career used to be and how meaningful or lack of meaningful that seems to be today, or how unfit some of the expectations we've been giving people around what work should look like and feel like and be all about, and how radically that's changing. And I think banking is just a great example for us to use as a launching pad, because the pace of change has dramatically increased for you to be competitive in that space, right?
Yeah.
And what that means is you probably need a different kind of worker. You probably need to be able to move quicker. You probably need a different org design. You probably need to design work differently. And you probably need to think through a different relationship with your talent, because talent is no longer expecting. And again, this is an overgeneralization, but it's hard to cover every single industry and every demographic with talent. But generally speaking, I think the workforce is starting to tell us, Saad, that job security is movement, not being stationary. And the longer I stay, the more vulnerable I may feel or may become. And I think that's a big uncomfortable notion for many employers today that I work with. They're frustrated. Both parties are frustrated right now. The employer's like, why aren't people staying? And the employees are like, well, why aren't you investing in me? And why aren't you putting me on cool projects? And I want to grow and I want to learn. And I think that's the lesson I think that employees are really going after is, I will stay if you make me better for tomorrow. I'm not going to stay because of your retirement fund or your matching or your perks or your benefits. And by the way, in a pandemic, what good is a beautiful work environment? Like, what good are those, free beer Fridays when you're not at the office having the free beer Friday? And I love that sort of neutralizer that the pandemic has created on top of all this change, which is, what's your culture today? It's this. It's you and me behind a screen engaging. It's not the office, the childcare center, the free commuter benefits that I get, right? And it's really stripped away a lot of the perks arms race that we got in due to the war for technical talent in the last few decades. So we find ourselves in a really interesting challenge. In hospitality, we were talking about this on the sort of the warm-up chat before, as people were dialing in. Hospitality industry has never had to fight for talent before. And those of us who've been recruiting, like I have in the technology sector, we've been fighting for decades, and we've learned how to get creative.
Yeah.
And the hospitality industry's got a lot to learn.
Yeah. Definitely. And it's like one of the things that some of the things that you pointed to, it makes me feel that there needs to be a new contract between employers and employees, that it's not like put your nose to grindstone and just work and you're here for 30 plus years. It's like to the comment that you made is like, you need to make me better for tomorrow. Could you expand a little bit on that? Like, what's the new contract look like between employees and employers?
Yeah, I think at a very, very general level, I think the new contract is, come here. I'm going to make this the most enriching experience for your career. And I would like to, in return, have you give me everything that you've got for however long that is. Yeah. And let's have, what I wanted to try to do in my book is portray something a little more meaningful than companies only caring about people when they work for them. And enlighten that and broaden it to say, why don't we have a better, bigger, more honest conversation and care about people for the entirety of their career, even when they don't work for us? And let's also be honest and say, no employer is the right place for everyone for the entirety of their career, right? Who could be so bold to think that? Because companies change, cultures change, leaders change, and people change. And so the likelihood of that being a fit for the entirety of your career is pretty outrageous. Right. Yeah. And so let's be more honest and say, hey, and we used to do this at LinkedIn. I mean, when we were really growing fast and we knew it was a very competitive market for talent and other companies could outbid us, outperk us, outbenefit us, we would start the conversation by saying, hey, let's talk about when you leave the company, where do you want to be? And they would be surprised. Wait, you're letting me go? I haven't even got a job offer yet. We say, no, we know we are part of your journey. We're not the destination. We're part of it. And if it's long, great. But let's be honest and say, you're here and you're going to learn things about yourself. And maybe you're going to want to do something that we can't offer you. And that's okay. Right. And what most companies struggle with when they hear that is like, well, if I train you and you leave, I lose. And I said, well, yes, you do lose if you train them and it takes a long time. You won't lose if there's a quick ramp up. If you've designed a job that requires someone to do lots and lots of training in a world where people are leaving faster and nobody thinks they're going to leave, longer or stay longer in the future. Everyone believes that tenure is going to continue to decline. So if you believe that, we really need to think how we design work a little bit differently. So that's the big, I think, reframe that a lot of organizations, I think, need to deal with. And it's not an easy reframe. It's not, because I knew I could build value the way I used to build it, the architecture that I built, and I'm comfortable with that. And I'm not comfortable experimenting with a new model, right?
Yep. No, that totally makes a ton of sense. And in some ways, like what this sort of makes me also think about is like identification of the right talent becomes incredibly important. You need to attract the right people and identify the right people as part of the funnel that do take that ownership and are additive to your culture. Because if people are constantly in this fluid nature from a workforce perspective, that qualification becomes really, really important, and the culture has a chance of dissipating over time. How do employers think about identification and onboarding of the right talent in this fluid nature of the new workforce?
Well, I've got some really unsatisfying feedback on that question, Saad, because I feel like both employers and employees have less awareness of what skills they should be building for the future. And because technology is intervening and the shelf life of value of a hard skill is diminishing, all the research is showing us that, because we're continually digitally transforming our businesses, which means we probably need to do work differently, which means we need different portfolio of skills. So my perspective on that is, if you accept that, most jobs are going to change. And even 10 years ago, when I was actively recruiting as the chief people officer at LinkedIn, I mean, the shelf life of a job description being accurate was like 2 months. Like, you knew the job was going to change because the market conditions were going to change, the competitive landscape is going to change. So how I see that playing out going forward is, I think we need to do a really good job of trying to attract people that have what I call high learning velocity. Right? They can learn and apply their skills quickly. And yes, I need a fundamental threshold of experience, but more than that, I need someone who can grow and learn. Because if we look at all the unicorns, and you're a very astute investor yourself, most of the unicorns that are out there today are not in the business they started out in, are they? Right. They pivoted, they changed, they learned, they tried new things. And I had a front row seat at LinkedIn. By the time I joined, the company had already pivoted from being a networking company to being a recruiting, primarily a recruiting company. That wasn't how in their master plan, even with a great set of, investors and venture firms behind them and a board, that still wasn't part of the plan. So what facilitated that, I think, was hiring people who were versatile, hiring people who could learn and adapt. And that's where I think this is really important to go. Like, if we play the, I call it the infinite unsuccessful game of trying to chase what skills we really need to hire, you're going to fail. But if you hire people who can learn whatever the new skills are, and you have a reasonable confidence that they have the capacity, I think that's a great insurance policy for you to be building the right kind of muscles, which are learning muscles, which again, interestingly enough, makes you more competitive, but also is going to get people to stay with you longer the more you invest in people. And the trick here is to build work that delivers learning. Not have the professor from Queens or professor from Oxford or Stanford or Yale, wherever. Yes, that's great. It's great to have that term. But when I'm talking about learning, I'm talking about new assignments, new bosses, new challenges that you have doing the work so that you get exposed to learning new things and you become more indispensable in the future, right?
It almost like makes me think that you need people that sort of take initiative and ownership and are to me, like one of the things I really liked about your book is you talk about like, hey, like don't invest in people that have done great things in the past. Invest in people that will do great things in the future, because you need to sort of focus on someone's potential, not what someone's accomplished. Accomplishments can take you really far, but at the same time, you want to help invest in people that end up taking your company to the next level. So I love that.
And the hard part of that, Saad, the hard part of that is, if I'm a recruiter or a hiring manager, no one's going to blame me for hiring someone that achieved a lot. You follow me?
Yes.
But someone who hasn't yet, or someone who is likely to but hasn't yet, that's a risk I'm taking. So it's not the safe call. You see? That's why it's easy for us to talk about, but in practice, you know, this is why I coach a lot of people who are trying to make a career pivot today. A lot of them. And they say, recruiters won't call me. I said, right. Because it's easier for a recruiter to fill someone who's got the experience than it is to convince the manager and take the risk on there and put their reputation on the line that you're going to figure it out. But here's the rub. Here's the reality. I mean, anyone who's listening to this right now is in an industry. Everyone's in an industry right now struggling to get the talent they need. So we got to push it a little bit and be creative, right? And so I agree with you. I mean, that's where it needs to go. Is this, we got to hedge on learning. We got to hedge on the learning velocity, and build ourselves, you know, more of a platform to be able to be more versatile as an organization.
Yeah, and it almost like you need to rethink the resume in some ways, right? Like the resume is a set of qualifications in the past. So like you need to kind of change the interview process and just really understand what drives a person and what is their end goal in mind. And I love how you sort of talk about like at LinkedIn, you talked about like, hey, what's your future here? And you have to like from that draw into like what is the thing that's driving them in 20, 30 years from now, and how does LinkedIn sort of fit into that journey, and sort of see how they sort of execute against that. So I think that's a really important thing for employers and stuff. And I guess now that you've sort of identified the best learners that you've onboarded, how do you think about retention and just upskilling these employees over time?
This is somewhat controversial, like a lot of things in my book, but I feel that retention is the wrong thing to focus on today. I think creating value is the right thing to focus on. And I think in a faster pace of business, let's just take the automobile industry as a good example, okay? What's the most valuable company in the automobile industry today? It's not the one that's been around the longest. It's not the one that's making the most cars. It's not the one that's making the most profit. The one that's most valuable is the one that's every investor believes is going to be the most innovative. It's Tesla. And they have a median tenure of around 2 years. And there are many of the people who were helping design their first automobiles were not from the auto industry. Yeah. Most of the automobile industry hires they made were in the production line, not in the design, which is really, really interesting. And so I get pushback a lot from people saying, well, you know, we need people here a long time. And I understand this notion of tenure and the notion of retention is really, really important, because the longer you stay, the belief is the more I trust you, the more I know you're going to deliver reliable results, the more likely the company will consistently deliver a good return. But in a world that's constantly changing, right? You staying a long time may limit the new ideas and new perspectives and new ways of solving problems. And I'll take you into the boardroom when I was at LinkedIn. This is, I mean, it's only 10 years ago, but I think it's still relevant. Whenever we would have a problem at LinkedIn, and it was frequent, we would have a problem. The CEO would sit us, all the executive team around and go like this. Hey, Deep, when you were at Google, how'd you solve this problem? Hey, Steve, when you were at Yahoo, how'd you solve this problem? Hey, Mike, when you were at Google or Adobe, how'd you solve this problem? Hey, Erica, when you were at Apple, and Steve, when you were at, and so that collective shared experience is really, really powerful. So I feel like in today's economy, and again, this is an overgeneralization. Some industries, if you're saving lives or putting people on the moon, you do not want to have people changing jobs, right? When is the biggest point of failure in a hospital? It's shift change, always, because that's a point of communication breakdown potential, right? And so what I'm trying to tell people is, listen, in a world that's moving really, really quickly, sometimes I think we've overvalued long-term employment and undervalued new people, new ideas, and new ways of solving problems. And if we look at Apple, Facebook, Google, Twitter, Microsoft, Oracle, Snap, Uber, Airbnb, none of those companies have a median tenure over 2 years, except Facebook's 2.02. So you can't tell me that some of the most valuable, some of the most profitable companies in the technology industry needed to build long tenure to be able to realize that. And maybe maybe we've overvalued that to a certain extent. Now, I want engagement. I want people to be really, really motivated. But sometimes I think what's a bigger thing that we should be solving for, and it took me years after LinkedIn to really sort of process this, is we were growing so fast. My median tenure was probably 9 months, and my engagement was always solid. It was always, probably on a net promoter score of around 54. Yep. Never really moved, even when we doubled the size every year. And so what I realized in that high frenetic environment is that you're unlocking a lot of energy, people doing a lot of things. And that's very powerful. And I think this, if I write another book, I think that's what I want to go after, is sort of this energy that we underestimate from giving people who are probably new and probably not on paper so qualified to do something. Yeah. When you ask anyone, when are you most excited in your career? When you're doing the same thing 5 years, or when you took on something new? It's always the new thing. So why have we built work, back to the original premise that you said, why have we built work to keep people doing the same thing for long periods of time? I know why we did, because we want a consistent, reliable outcome. Right. Yep. But people are feeling vulnerable the longer they stay doing the same thing, and the energy is getting lost. So, so this is an interesting thing. I want people to be fired up, but I think new experiences and new challenges, that's what I want to go for. Not some, engagement score that seems a little bit outdated to me right now.
Yeah. And I think that engagement is really important to sort of keep on people's radar, especially in the fluid workforce that we've talked about. How do you sort of think about assessing your employees' engagement, and what are your thoughts on like the role of technology in this new world? And I think honestly, like COVID has accelerated this, because like you don't have colleagues that you're sitting by and to know like, hey, how is this person actually doing? Like, does this person need help? Like everyone's distributed across the globe now, and COVID is accelerating that, and you need to kind of figure out how engaged some of these people are. They're right.
I think we have a great opportunity right now with a pandemic to create a better model of work. And so you're a global traveler, Saad. I know you are from conversations and knowing you for a while, as am I. I've worked in the field. I've worked on remote teams. I've done that before the pandemic. And one of the things that I think the pandemic has done wonderfully is help raise the comfort level with leaders who are never comfortable managing people that they couldn't see in the same workspace. But it's also help level the playing field for that one worker on your team that was never in the room when you're having a staff meeting. They were dialing in, they were on video, they were always getting talked over, they never felt included. And now the playing field's been leveled. It's a beautiful thing. And I think there's a lot more, I think, that we're able to realize, maybe more, elimination of bias in the recruiting process, for example. That's a big one, right? We always used to, okay, we're going to fly you in for the final rounds of interviews and, meet you in person. Don't do that now. Sometimes some companies are even doing interviews with cameras off, so, which is interesting. And so I think there's ways that we're going to be able to, if you really step back and say, what does all the research tell us about teams and organizations? Well, the highest performing ones have trust and psychological safety, high degrees of that. So the question I had as an extrovert, as the sort of classically trained HR leader is, well, all those informal interactions that people are, exchanging ideas and innovating, where's that going now, right? Because we don't have that reality. And so that's a big challenge that we have today, right? So the fact that we've got this new domain where people aren't able to see each other, we shouldn't necessarily assume that we can't be building those relationships, because like right now, since we've been on, the sun's going down. I could sort of get a sense of what time zone. I know a little bit more about your personal circumstances, right? I'm assuming you're in an office because you're in a tower, but I don't know. But I think we've gotten a chance to see into the homes of our colleagues more, to get to know each other maybe a little more personally, right? And that's another new dimension that we've been served that I think gives us an edge that we didn't have when we're all going to the office, right?
Yep.
And I think that's something that we should take advantage of, that we should be coming out of this saying, let's not look at this as a situation. Let's look at this as a long-term opportunity that we can get to know each other. And I also think, and this, having talked to many chief HR officers over the last few months, one of the biggest realities is that everyone's personal awareness of their safety, their health and safety at work, is now relevant to their employment circumstances. You never used to say, hey, Saad, we're going to have a meeting of all 25 of us in the office next week. And you would go, well, you know what? I've got a sick kid at home. I'm not coming into the office, right? I'm going to stay here. Or I don't want to go and bring germs to because my son's on, immunocompromised, protocol for medication, right? So that's a whole new dimension. Like, I got to know your circumstances. I got to know if someone's not well in your house, because if someone's not well, you're going to be distracted, or you're going to be prevented from delivering your best. That's what the pandemic has kind of served us. And I hope we take advantage of that human connection, right? To build better muscle that we didn't build when we worked together. We didn't talk about each other's home life maybe as much before as we do now, which is interesting.
Definitely. And I think, like, if you think about the big employment cities like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, the reason why they were big employment centers is because all the employers were there. And the reason why, and historically speaking, if you think about the work schedule and all this other stuff, it revolved around your employment. And the pandemic has shifted that completely. And your work needs to fit around your life and your family. And employers need to start kind of adhering to some of those restrictions, because, like, if you've got a crying 2-year-old in the back, you can't take a meeting at that point. And there's some people that are like, hey, I'll work from like 7 to 10 or 12 because I have to take care of a sick parent, or I have like kids that I have to put to bed and all this other stuff. So like you can't get away from that. And in some ways, like, it's forcing companies and enterprises to really rethink how they sort of work around people's schedules. And now it actually, like, to your point, it opens up the globe to employers, because like now you have like different people that have similar schedules that they can align with and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just give you some anecdotes from the last 6 months of my life. So I was in Hawaii a few months ago on vacation, and we waited 1 hour to get a table, and then we waited 1 hour for our food. And after the first hour, I was really irritated. But after the second hour, I go, okay, this is now turned from dinner to a cultural experiment. Like, now I'm really curious, like, what's going on here? And it wasn't like a super fancy restaurant that was impossible to get into. So I asked the waitress, hey, what's going on? I'm like, I'm still going to give you a tip, and everything's fine, but what's happening? She says, well, we're all new, because everyone that worked this restaurant didn't come back after the pandemic. And the kitchen was staffed for customers in the restaurant, and now 50% of the orders are for home delivery. And so they're like, whoa. I was at the auto parts store last week, 17 deep in a line just to buy a pair of replacement windshield wiper blades, 17 deep. Wow. For a place that I go to regularly, and is usually 3 people. And then 2 nights ago, I flew into Atlanta, and I got in late with a hotel reservation, and the clerk said, sorry, we don't have a room for you. I'm like, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. I've got a reservation. Of course you got a room for me. Did you give it away? And they said, no, we don't have enough staff to service your room, so we can't give you the room. And I was just like, whoa. So all these new, like, crazy circumstances that we're facing right now are just coming at us so fast, Saad. And that's hard. It's hard to adjust to, hey, we've got a new psychology of the workforce. We've got these new pandemic circumstances. We've got to figure out what's, as a leadership team, what's our vaccination policy and position. And if we've got employees in states that are in the United States, seeing this completely on opposite lines, how are we going to reconcile that? And so we've got so many of these new challenges. I really feel for a lot of businesses right now, because it's not easy, but the net, I think that you're driving at is one that I totally agree, which is we're seeing the beginning of the personalization of the work experience. We have to more customize. And by the way, that whole 9 to 5, that whole summer vacation thing, that was derived during the industrial revolution and agrarian times. Like, we have got to come up with different ways of doing it. And, I know some people that own multiple fast food restaurants, and they're like, I can't hire people. I'm like, well, why are you just hiring for a store? Or why are you just hiring a full-time person? Why aren't you hiring someone that could work, Monday, Tuesday, one place, and maybe Wednesday mornings at another one? It's a little more scheduling on your part, but maybe their life habits would be better served if it was more of a patchwork rather than I need a full-time person, right? And our only blockage right now, and I have to deal with so many companies that say, we've got a recruiting problem. I said, I'm sorry, but I disagree with you. I don't think you have a recruiting problem. You have a failure to be creative on how to create value problem. Like you're assuming I have to have a full-time person to do this. So you're frustrated. And I don't think so. Honestly, I hate to, pour water on the fire of the people who are optimistic about the future. We're only the beginning of this. I think it's going to be messy for a while. And the sooner you get creative, I think the more advantage you're going to have. I mean, here we are as we're recording this today, 19 months into the pandemic. Still, most companies I work with have been holding off on big decisions, whether it's new product or new people investment or new offices, because they're waiting for the future to be more certain. And they're finally going, I guess it's not going to happen. And so they're having to make choices 19 months in now, right? And so, and that's hard. Like I have a lot of grace and a lot of respect and for a lot of the leaders who are just, we haven't faced something like this before, but you're going to have to be creative right now. You have to be around how you're going to build value and not just assume I need a full-time person. Like maybe I need these skills. Maybe that's where I should start. And maybe I could go to some of these, Fiverr, Upwork, some of these new, more freelance platforms and meet my needs, right? Shorter term until we get a little more clarity, right? And one of the things that I'm seeing happening, which is really interesting when you think about company culture, which is, I believe the core of most big enterprises is shrinking and the independent contractor portion of their workforce is growing. So they have more, ability to expand and contract in an uncertain future. And so that becomes really a challenge. And the labor laws of the United States are such that you've got to keep a big distance between, employee and independent contractor. And so it's challenging businesses, right, in new ways.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, Steve. And Steve, I know we're running a bit over time, so I wanted to thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights. It was really fun. And thanks again. And for the audience here, thanks everyone for joining. And we'll have a recording of this up on YouTube later this week. And if you want to learn more about how we're working on next-gen HR technologies at Telstra Ventures, please visit our website at www.telstra-ventures.com.